Live from the Ken and Valerie Baker studio at WHYY, this is Studio 2.
On Wednesday, August 20th, welcome on in, friends. I am Cherry Gregg.
And I am Avi Wolfman-Arent.
And so, Avi, my timeline has been flooded with people in our region talking about the impending SEPTA service cuts that are expected to go in effect on August 24th.
4 days away.
Few days away. Oh, my goodness. And all of this comes because lawmakers in Harrisburg have failed to reach a compromise. Why? Well, Republican lawmakers, mostly from western and rural parts of Pennsylvania, they are very resistant to giving more funding to southeastern Pennsylvania and specifically to public transit. And this has underscored the longtime rift between rural and urban Pennsylvania. And so today on the show, we'll explore the divide and we'll get an inside look at those budget negotiations where SEPTA funding has become the flashpoint. We'll hear from Republican State Senator Frank Farry, as well as Democratic House Speaker Joanna McClinton. And we want you, our listeners at home, on the road, and elsewhere to weigh in on this urban-rural divide. Our question of the day is this: how would you convince rural Pennsylvania lawmakers to fund SEPTA or to make the Philadelphia region a priority? The number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook, because we're now streaming on Facebook as well, you can put the comments in the live chat there.
Again, how would you convince those rural Pennsylvania lawmakers to fund SEPTA or to make the Philly region a priority? 888-477-9499. First, however, a trio of local news stories, starting with something that's churning off of the Atlantic coast and maybe causing some problems for folks in our region. So shore season is about to come to an end in New Jersey, but some of the oceans are already closed, at least for the next few days. And that's because of this hurricane, Hurricane Erin, which could cause major flooding in New Jersey and Delaware. In fact, the National Weather Service is already warning of potential major flooding from 5 p.m. today to early Saturday morning. Meanwhile, very high risk for dangerous rip currents, which has caused some towns like Atlantic City, Ocean City, and others to close their beaches down temporarily because of the risk. Also looking at the possibility of major beach erosion with waves as high as 12 feet. So this is nothing to joke around about.
No. And it definitely makes it harder to, enjoy the beach. I mean, this is one of the final weekends that you get to enjoy the shore during the season. But we cannot get complacent because, right now lawmakers are not declaring a statewide emergency to keep swimmers out the water. But we have to say, do not go in the water because, those rip currents have claimed the life of a 31-year-old man just a few days ago. Hundreds of people had to be pulled out of the water across New Jersey beaches, and we lose about 100 people a year to rip currents across the country. Thousands have to be rescued. So even if the weather clears up, it's like that water is going to be rough for some time.
Yeah. Story number 2, Cherry.
Yeah, a mural of Vice President J.D. Vance popped up in Fishtown last week, and it has literally become the talk of a town, going viral on social media. The mural is located on the side of Suleime's restaurant, and it shows a bald, baby-faced caricature of the vice president wearing a blue suit and a red tie with piercing, icy blue eyes. And it's often been referred to as the bald baby or Baby Vance meme. Now, views of videos depicting this mural are in the millions on TikTok, racking up hundreds of thousands of likes. And this mural was created by Fubar Pack with about $200 worth of paint. That's according to the Philadelphia Inquirer. And it was done to protest the Trump administration's painful federal funding cuts, but also to forge community. And by the way, Fubar stands for effed up beyond all means of repair, if you wondered.
I always thought it was effed up beyond all means of recognition. I guess it's either or.
Either or, yeah.
I mean, the fact that we can't even say what Fubar Pack stands for on air is a good illustration of their approach. And I was doing a little digging on the group. It's a relatively new pack that was founded by a Philly strategist named Jack Inneker. Inneker describes himself in a professional capacity as a, quote, expert hater.
Oh.
And FUBAR is all about basically trolling Republicans. That's their political strategy. They were also behind that stunt where people, including Philly Elmo, smashed a Tesla.
I remember that. Yeah.
So FUBAR is trying to basically provoke people with these political stunts. And it raises a larger question about what Democrats' strategy should be to regain power. And can you troll your way back into power? Does this speak to voters? Are there voters who are engaged or potentially, locked in because of viral stunts like this?
I will say I live in Fishtown, and this was the talk of the neighborhood cookout over the weekend. So in many ways, I would say the trolling worked. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of comments in local Facebook groups about this. And we forget, Senator John Fetterman literally won an election because he was a very effective troll online. Our president knows how to troll people and has become, I think, the king of trolling, it would be fair to say. But I truly wonder if trolling culture actually works to make change or does anything. And I think this could be a whole show where we talk about trolling culture, how it's changed, how the internet has changed, how we do politics, and even communicate with each other.
It's a perfect illustration of how the internet has changed how politics work at a street level. We're literally talking about the street here. We're talking about a mural. But, you raise an interesting point, which is it is possible we're in this interesting dichotomy where you almost have to troll to build political power. But in the process of doing it, once you get that power, it becomes harder to govern.
Yeah, because people are mad. They really are mad at you.
Yeah, because it works.
Yeah.
Basically, its effectiveness then becomes, in some ways, a hindrance on your ability to unite people around ideas and make, let's say, gradual change. So I do think it's a fascinating, broader conversation. People are mostly just ha-haing at the mural, but it does speak to something in our times. I would agree with you.
Because that mural does stand out. It catches your attention, and then people are talking. Literally, thousands of people are talking about it. So,
third story. Speaking of things that are going to get people mad,
I was mad. I'll say that. Full disclosure.
Reader's Digest recently came up with a list where they picked the signature comfort food of each state. And I have to say, the picks in our region surprised me quite a bit. For New Jersey, they went with disco fries. You know what disco fries are?
I did not know. I had to look it up.
Yeah, it's kind of like mid-Atlantic poutine. That's how I would describe it.
Poutine.
Gravy on fries and cheese.
Okay.
Pennsylvania, they picked Pennsylvania Dutch chicken pot pie.
What?
It looked familiar to me. I'm not sure I've ever had it.
I like pot pie, but I mean, is that the comfort food of Pennsylvania?
It's like a soup version of pot pie.
Okay.
And then for Delaware, they picked something called slippery dumplings. And I'll be honest,
You had to look that one up.
I had to look that one up.
ChatGPT, that one. What is that?
Slippery dumplings. It definitely needs a rebrand at the very least. Apparently, it's a lower Delaware thing, and it actually is not that dissimilar to Dutch chicken pot pie. It's like a dumpling soup type of concept. But I mean, what would you have gone with? I guess for Pennsylvania or New Jersey, these were not what I was expecting.
First of all, who's in charge over at Reader's Digest?
The readers.
And I just was like, where did this come from? And by the way, our home state of Maryland got stuffed ham.
Never heard of it.
And it's literally like a ham stuffed with cabbage and kale. Never eaten that. Okay. And we're from Maryland.
I would try it.
But it's not the comfort food of the state.
I mean, crab cakes, hello.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, who picked it?
I think it has to do with what's a comfort food, really. They went with things that are super carby. For the most part.
But I will say this. I mean, states in the South, they got good things. North Carolina got pulled pork sandwiches.
Georgia.
South Carolina got fish and grits. Georgia got peach cobbler.
Yeah.
How do we get...
I think the person who wrote this was from the South. I think that's what we're narrowing it on here. I will say, I'm an Eastern Pennsylvania person all day, all night. And we're talking about that on the show today. But if I was going to pick a comfort food,
it wouldn't be that. What would it be?
I would go out west and I would pick the pierogi. Because I think
I
that's
like pierogies.
truly a comfort food.
Yeah, I
It's
like
like a lot
pierogies.
of cheesy, creamy, carbiness.
Yeah.
And, Pittsburgh, they do pierogies very well out there.
We wouldn't have been
Shout
mad
out
at Pittsburgh getting a
Shout
shout
out
out.
Pittsburgh. I mean, I think the soft pretzel and scrapple have an argument here.
Scrapple, definitely for Delaware. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. Why
Yeah.
wouldn't they get scrapple over, whatever the slippery...
The tricky one here
Dumplings.
is hoagie. Is a hoagie a comfort food? Because I put it over those foods as a food,
Can you
but
put
is
it-
it a comfort food?
Could you put it in a toaster and just warm it up?
Yeah, Quiznos style.
Maybe you could do it that way.
Shout out Quiznos. Does that still exist? I don't know.
I think it does.
Okay, so speaking of Eastern Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania culture, Pennsylvania collaboration, we're talking today about what seems to be this growing urban-rural divide in PA politics. Stay tuned to Studio 2. A lot more to come. And welcome back to Studio 2 on WHYY. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arendt.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. Pennsylvania's state budget is now 51 days late. At the heart of the tardiness is a debate over public transit. SEPTA, as you probably know, needs major dollars to stave off major cuts. But Republicans and Democrats can't seem to agree on how to deliver those dollars.
That's the argument on the surface. But it's become clear that this budget battle is also a kind of proxy for the greater conflict between southeastern Pennsylvania and the rest of the state. Urban PA versus rural. Has the rift between the two grown wider? And if so, why?
We'll hear from both sides of the aisle today, and we'll start with State Senator Frank Farry, who represents a part of Bucks County that extends from Bensalem to Warrington. Senator Farry, welcome to Studio 2.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
We are pleased to have you, sir. We also invite our listeners at home, on the road, and elsewhere to chime in. How would you convince rural PA lawmakers to fund SEPTA or make the Philly region a priority? Give us a call, 888-477-9499. Email studio2@whyy.org. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, drop a comment in the chat.
And so, Senator, we want to start with the Senate GOP plan, which draws from the Public Transportation Trust Fund for a couple of years. It mandates every other year fare increases and adds safety accountability measures for SEPTA. I want you to take a minute or two and just, give us your case for this plan and why the House plan, which is a little bit different, is not acceptable.
Sure, and I'll work in reverse order. So the plan that the House has passed several times, at least the last plan now has some of the accountability and some of the safety issues, which we can dive deeper into those two things a little later. But the House plan, the biggest problem with it is it's taking existing sales tax revenue and it is diverting it to mass transit. So that sales tax revenue, which is currently, part of our general fund, is used for, pick an item, public education, funding our hospitals, programming for our seniors. And the question has been asked numerous times of many of the elected folks on their side. And I know you're going to have the speaker on next, and maybe she can answer the question. What is either being cut or is this adding to our structural deficit, which is in the billions of dollars? So as we're trying to solve this current budget situation, we have a several $billion structural deficit. The $300 million to public transit across the Commonwealth is just adding to that structural deficit to solve SEPTA's structural deficit. And by the way, I'm a supporter of funding for public transit. When I went to college, I literally commuted on regional rail from the Langhorne station down to 30th Street. So I'm somebody that's used it. My wife and I went to an Eagles game last year, parked in Center City, took the North Broad Street line down to the stadium. So I'm a supporter of it. Born and raised here in Bucks County. I'm a suburban guy, lower Bucks guy. So may not be able to fully speak to the rural side of things, but I can at least give you a context of what I've heard from my colleagues. So that's the issue with the House Democrat plan. The plan we have in the Senate actually takes some of the existing public transit trust fund dollars, currently has a $2.4 billion fund balance. It would divert some of that funding for the next 2 years to fund public transit. It would get SEPTA in the clear for 2 years, so these cuts wouldn't need to happen. It's literally money sitting in a bank in Harrisburg. There's no speculation on what revenues will be, how much is going to come in. There's no speculation on what's going to get cut or what the structural deficit is for the general fund budget. This is money that's available right now. The counterpoint people have used is it's going to compromise capital projects, and that's just simply not true. We have PennDOT documentation on all of the capital projects for the next 20 years. I'll focus in on the next 5 years. There's $1.2 to $1.3 billion of capital projects throughout this Commonwealth in the next 5 years. The fund itself is going to generate over $2.5 billion in new revenue in the next 5 years. So doing the math on that, the fund balance will grow from $2.4 to $3.7 billion heading into 2030. So that so that shows that there is sufficient funding to cover what is needed for SEPTA and the other public transit agencies across this Commonwealth.
So,
if
Senator,
our plan became, go ahead.
Yeah, but I want to read the statement from Scott Sauer, General Manager of SEPTA, who says, quote, instead of service cuts due to lack of operating funding, SEPTA would be forced to eliminate or truncate service because vehicles and infrastructure can no longer support service. That's in reaction to the Senate Republican plan. So he's saying something very different than what you're saying right now. Help me understand why there's a gap here.
And what I'll say to that is I literally met with Scott and the chair of their board Tuesday of last week before we even had the vote and went over the plan with them. Their tune changed somewhere along the way as they wandered around the Capitol. We have not heard. My last conversation with SEPTA was Tuesday of last night.
And in that conversation on Tuesday, what he said to you, I'm going to infer here, is that they could absorb that loss from the PTTF in order to fund operating expenses and basically continue on their current trajectory. And you're saying he changed what he was saying
Correct.
About the plan. Okay,
correct. They were very intrigued by the plan and thought it was something that could work. They obviously they had to look at the numbers. But we haven't heard from SEPTA, myself and my Southeastern Republican colleagues. We haven't heard from SEPTA since Tuesday night of last week. We actually sent them a letter on Friday clarifying some of the impacts on the fund, and we still haven't heard from them. Doesn't sound like a very willing partner in terms of finding a solution.
And are you implying?
And I can tell you,
are you implying? I'm sorry to cut you off, but are you implying? You said they walked around the Capitol. You're implying that they would have been for it, except for Democrats talked them out of it.
They met with the governor's office and other people in the Capitol, and then all of a sudden they came out and opposed the plan. We met with them again before it was voted on, clarified the misinformation they had, and there were several meetings back and forth, and then they still ultimately ended up opposing the plan, even though we clarified and answered all their questions. And look, look, I don't want to get into politics because I'm not a divisive person. I want a solution, right? There's families out there that are wondering how they're going to get kids to school next week, how people are going to get to work, to their medical appointments. There's money sitting in the bank in Harrisburg right now, and I can go over the numbers with you for hours that literally show every capital project will be funded. The fund balance actually grows while we take this money out for revenue or for operating. And by the way, the fund can divert money to operating if needed. PennDOT has the ability to do it. That's actually in regulation. So we don't even need to statutorily change anything. But, you have two competing policies. One, the money is in the bank and the capital projects will not be compromised because the fund balance continues to grow. And nobody has been able to show us where the fund gets upside down. Nobody has provided any of that information in the last week.
But you agree this is still only a short-term, 2-year horizon type of solution.
100%. But guess what?
So we're still going to be back in this place in a couple of years. You would agree with that?
Well, but the goal of this, and I believe it to be a bipartisan goal and bicameral goal, is to tax and regulate skill games.
Mm-hmm. So it's to get to that point.
Process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's going to take a couple years to generate the new revenue. By the time the Gaming Control Board, licenses everybody and goes through the background checks and all that. So this 2-year stopgap would actually then be met with the new revenue from the taxes on skill games that would then be the long-term funding. I introduced legislation 1.5 years ago that literally was based on these skill games and will generate, projected to be over $1 billion a year. And I had half of that money going into transportation funding to address this problem. So before this became a proverbial front page issue, literally I was already working on a solution. The solution is the skill games. And my bill is introduced, by the way, bipartisan. There's the co-primes on it are 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats.
And Senator, why is this taking so long? Because it seems like every single year we come up to this place where SEPTA and our public transit systems are falling over this fiscal cliff. We've had these lawmakers having these same arguments. Last year, the governor had to do some type of maneuvering with highway funding, flex funding. And so why do we keep coming to this same place every single year with this impasse?
I think part of it lays at SEPTA's feet in terms of efficiencies. I mean, when you have $50 million annually, that's their number of fare evasions, right? People jumping the turnstiles. I mean, they need to get their own house in order. The $50 million doesn't solve their full structural deficit, but it obviously plays a part in it. People are concerned about the cleanliness of SEPTA, the safety of SEPTA. Like SEPTA needs to clean up some stuff on their own end so people are more encouraged to use mass transit. And as part of our package, I have legislation that makes it a more significant criminal penalty for assault on a transit worker. That is twice passed the Senate and is sitting in the House with no action, right? We want their workforce to feel safer where they're doing their jobs, and that actually makes it safer for the commuters as well. So, I mean, I think there's a whole bunch of things that go into this, but also you have to look at the underlying funding of SEPTA. 59% of SEPTA's budget is funded by the Commonwealth. 21% is funded by the federal government. 7% is funded by the counties and the city of Philadelphia, the 4 suburban counties, city of Philadelphia. Only 13% of their operating budget comes from their own generated revenues, whether that's fares, advertising, the various things. So if you think about it, the government is subsidizing them to a huge amount of money, which is important because we need a robust mass transit system in a metropolitan area such as this
Senator,
for our economy.
This goes to one of the basic premises of this show is that how do you convince, because you're part of the greater Philadelphia area, you ride SEPTA, you understand some of the challenges that we're dealing with. How do you convince your more rural colleagues to buy into the idea that we do need this mass transit? Just yesterday on the show, we talked about there are ripple effects. Amtrak could very well lose millions of dollars in funding, and we could see, less service to Philadelphia from New York. There are many ripple effects. How do you make that argument to your constituencies?
Sure, and I'm going to clear up that Amtrak thing because that's been debunked even by the governor. And the loss of revenue Amtrak will face in the regional rail cancellations that SEPTA is proposing for January will affect their infrastructure, but not their operating. So they cleared that up yesterday. Just to be clear, because I don't want to create a panic among Amtrak riders, but we do need to be conscious of your point. So how do we convince our colleagues to buy in? Pennsylvania is very diverse, right? There's 50 senators, 203 representatives. We all represent different communities, different populations, and that's not even getting into the Republican-Democrat part of it, right? With the different ideologies and whatnot. 27 Republicans on Tuesday of last week voted for this bill. Only 4 of us represent Southeastern PA. Only 2 of us have our full districts within Southeastern PA. So basically 2 full senators, 2 partial senators, and 23 other Republican senators voted for this funding plan. And that was because they're getting money back for their rural roads. The road and bridge, or the road component of that bill, a lot of it's going to rural, some of it's going to suburban, and some of it's going to the city. But that flex funding you mentioned a few minutes ago, Cherry, that $153 million the governor flexed last year were all rural road and bridge projects. So my colleagues were pretty peeved about that,
Right.
as you can imagine, right? And that all went to SEPTA. That there wasn't even a portion of it that went to their transit agencies, which in some cases are bus and senior rides and whatnot in the rural areas. They're not trains and big buses like we have down here. So they were pretty upset about that because they had projects actually canceled because of the flexing of that money by the governor. So there was something needed to kind of balance that back out.
Yeah.
And them getting transportation funding for their communities caused them to be supportive and vote for this bill.
Let me ask
myself and now Senator Picozzi. Let me close one point here. Myself and Senator Picozzi, right, who's newly elected from Northeast Philly, we're kind of unicorns in that room, right? When we go into a caucus room and it's the 27 of us Republicans, and Picozzi just got there. I've been there for a few years. I was in the House before that. We're advocating we are the only voices advocating in that room for some of these things. And I greatly respect Leader Pittman and President Pro Tem Ward for recognizing the importance of it, because our leaders, even though they're from Westmoreland and Indiana County, right, they made sure they were able to get something done for SEPTA.
What do you hear back when you're in that room advocating? Honestly,
they're concerned about the safety. I mean, they see the headlines. They see people getting shot at transit stops, and Bernard Gibbons, the poor SEPTA bus driver who was tragically murdered just doing his job, right? So they see the crime stuff. They come down here. Judy Ward, the chair of our transportation committee, and Cameron Baralata, who is from Western Pennsylvania, 2 senators, literally came down here a few months ago with myself and Picozzi, and we had a meet and greet with business leaders in the city. We rode various aspects of SEPTA, train, trolley, the whole kit and caboodle. SEPTA was able to put on a dog and pony show for our transportation chair to show how important they are. Our health system spoke, our university spoke about how vital SEPTA is for their students, their workforce, their patients. And these colleagues of mine took time out of their schedule to travel here and learn more about SEPTA. And I commend them for doing that, because there's not a lot of elected officials.
But there is ultimately a reluctance to tip any more funding toward public transit, especially if it comes at the expense of rural roads and bridges, which I understand. I mean, they're representing their constituents and the interests of their constituents. But it would seem to me embedded in that they don't see their interests tied up in the fate of southeastern Pennsylvania, even though the argument here is that it very much is, because of all the economic activity that is generated in this part of the state. Is that a fair characterization? They see this as we're splitting the pie, not we need to help you because it ultimately helps us?
I think there's a balance to that, right? Because their counterpoint would be, without the energy they generate where they are, like the lights wouldn't be on here, right, for that economic driver. And I'll tell you what I try and do. I try and not get in the weeds of a contest of, we do this, but you do that.
Yeah.
That doesn't get anything solved, right? Let's find where we can have common ground. I think enough of my colleagues recognize that the economy of Pennsylvania is in large part driven by the Pittsburgh region and by southeastern Pennsylvania. And they know the importance of that. They recognize the importance of that. But to your point a few moments ago, they're elected to represent their communities, right? And I joke, some of their districts have more deer than people, but they're elected to represent those communities, and it's their job to do it. But that doesn't mean they can't find commonality with what's the greater good of Pennsylvania. And you saw that last week, because not a single Republican voted against that funding.
Yeah. And by the way, we only have a couple more minutes in this segment, but I wanted to bring a caller who's from he's from Bristol Bucks County. So I'm not sure if that's directly in
right
the
outside your district.
But
it's next door.
Yeah. And so I have Michael from Bristol Bucks County on the line who wants to give a quick comment. Michael, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
If there is no buses for SEPTA in the suburbs, and just closing down SEPTA and Bucks County transport for disabled, senior, and low income, a lot of people aren't going to be going to work. And that is no rents, no food purchases, no taxes on them.
Yeah.
I'd like to see horse trading. I want this bill, this wording, this amount for your vote, this bill, this wording, this amount.
Yeah.
Horse trade and bill faith. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's Michael from Bristol.
Interesting
And
comment.
so would love to get you to speak to these folks, like Michael, like others who are going to possibly be impacted as of the 24th if the SEPTA funding doesn't come through. Talk to them, tell them what you're doing, what you're working on, and just speak to them because they're going to feel the pain of it all.
100%. And look, there are other Senate districts that are much more impacted by this than mine, right? There will be impacts here, mostly regional rail, but there are other districts that are more dependent on mass transit that are going to be greatly impacted. And as I said earlier, I'm worried about those families that can't figure out how to get their kids to school next week. People how to figure out go to doctor's appointments, go to work, as well as the SEPTA workforce. We can't forget about them as well because they're caught up in this. So I think it's important we come to a solution. But we passed the legislation last Tuesday evening. The Senate returned with the House returned with committee meetings on Wednesday, and just roundly rejected the bill. Didn't amend it. Didn't fire a compromise bill back. And this standoff continues. And I still have not heard the debunking of the capital funding that you touched on. Right? You read Scott Sauer's comments. I haven't heard from Scott Sauer in a week. They certainly haven't gotten back to us to actually show us the numbers.
Are there concessions that you'd be willing to make to close this gap?
Sure, I'm happy. I'm happy for any idea out there that gets this resolved. But we also have to look at the global vote. We talked about that general fund money and moving that $300 million. And hopefully, maybe the speaker can provide you some clarity on that when I'm done speaking.
Yeah.
Because that's going to add to our structural deficit, right? And I don't think my colleagues want to add to the structural deficit to fund mass transit when there's money sitting in a bank account in Harrisburg.
Yeah. One more thing I want to get you to respond to before you go. I know you've got to run. One way to solve all this is to disentangle the state and SEPTA from a financial perspective, to give counties greater ability to levy their own taxes for transit so that pie you talked about earlier is tilted more toward local funding and away from state funding, especially if some in the state see funding SEPTA as a burden. Can we start to walk down that road at some point, or is that just a non-starter for Republicans?
So no, actually the legislation we passed last week actually has a matching requirement for the counties and the city. And that money would actually be dedicated to safety projects, which again makes SEPTA more attractive for riders.
But allowing them to raise taxes to that end, though.
Well, we aren't requiring them to raise taxes. We're requiring them to fund it. We want the local governments to figure out how best they can fund it. We don't want to be telling them they have to raise X taxes or whatever. They have a fund balance. However they decide they want to do it, they can decide to do it. But we literally incentivize them to invest in SEPTA, and that money would be used for safety components.
Well, I thank you so much for your time today,
you,
Senator Frank Farry from Bucks County. It was really enlightening, and thanks for stopping by studio, too.
Thank you, folks.
On the other side of the break,
House Speaker Joanna McClinton is here, Democrat. She's going to talk about the House bill and make the argument for closing the gap on funding for SEPTA. Stick with us. Lots to come on the other side of this break. This is Studio 2.
And welcome back, everybody, to Studio 2 on WHYY. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arendt.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. We are continuing our conversation about the budget impasse in Harrisburg and the deepening divide between Philadelphia and rural parts of Pennsylvania. And before the break, we heard from Republican State Senator Frank Farry, who represents parts of Bucks County. And now we have in studio with us Democratic Speaker of the Pennsylvania House, Joanna McClinton. House Speaker McClinton, welcome to Studio 2.
Thank you.
And our phone lines for you at home, on the road, on a lunch break are still open. How would you convince rural Pennsylvania lawmakers to fund SEPTA or make the Philly region a priority? Call 888-477-9499. You can email studio2@whyy.org. If you're on YouTube, hello, drop a comment in the chat.
And so, Speaker McClinton, the House bill boosts transit statewide by increasing the share of sales tax revenue allocated to transit, roads, and bridges. And so I want to give you a couple of minutes to sort of lay out your argument for why Democrats believe that this is the best way to provide a permanent fix for SEPTA and mass transit funding.
So first of all, this is not a new problem. This has been a chronic challenge, quite frankly, since the pandemic. Like so many other industries, costs have risen and revenues have either remained flat, declined, or are in the comeback stage. And when you talk to the leadership at SEPTA, the members of the board, each caucus in Harrisburg has an appointee there. House, Senate, Republican D, we all have someone who's a part of that governing body representing our interests. Their costs have continued to rise, and of course their revenue for a little while was completely declined because of the pandemic, but now it continues to rise, but they're not going at the same levels. So when we took over in the majority at the end of the election in November 22, we go in, with one seat majority, which we still have today, with a willing mind to compromise, because we understand we are not working with Democrats across the building. We're working with the Senate Republican supermajority for all intents and purposes with the numbers they have versus the number we have. So this issue started some time ago, and we have made effort. In the last session, 23-24, we passed the funding for transit 4 separate times, because it's like, hey guys, the roof's on fire. Hey guys, the structure's on fire. Hey guys, the fire's spreading. And the question,
sales tax, why is this the best way?
Because it creates a new revenue. They're already getting a portion, but it's not sustainable. And let's also be clear, it's not just SEPTA. This is also a challenge for Pittsburgh Regional Transit, where they have significant ridership, and they too will be facing a structural deficit. It's not as immediate. They don't have cuts starting right now, but they are similarly in a situation where they need more investment at the state level. So if we're already using this funding stream, what can we do to increase it? And then what will be done afterwards? Because we currently have $11 billion in our rainy day fund. We are not at a position which we were previously at when I first came to Harrisburg, working in the Senate for my senators, chief counsel. We were looking under the cushions trying to find 50 cents. However, there's now $11 billion in our rainy day fund. So when I hear my colleague from the Senate in Bucks County, Frank Farry, saying that we're going to have a structural deficit, we're not going to have a structural deficit, because we actually have a large savings that we can tap into.
And so his argument would be you're going to borrow from the savings now, but down the road, because there is an imbalance between what the state's bringing in and what it's spending, there's going to be some issues. And I guess they're saying now's the time to take a stand. No more spending, no more diversion, no more cutting into that money. We need to start to balance things. What do you say back to that?
Well, I say that we sent several ways to create new revenue. The first thing that Governor Josh Shapiro proposed was giving people a raise in the minimum wage. I mean, it's been stuck for almost 20 years at $7.25. You take people to a living wage, that would eliminate their need for state services, whether we're talking about childcare or other subsidies. That would save us money, because they have now enough money coming into their pocket every Friday, every other Wednesday, whenever they get paid. The second thing that we did was propose legalizing cannabis. People in every state surrounding Pennsylvania, except West Virginia, so that's Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Delaware, They all have billboards. If you're on 95, come over here, try our cannabis, da 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 da. You know, they've got these ads everywhere. They're on social media, they're on the highway, they're on the roads. So why don't we get involved in that industry? We sent the bill over to the Senate because that's a way to create new revenue. The Senate called into a committee and voted the bill down immediately. Nothing has yet occurred with our raise in the minimum wage. There's been talk of legalizing skill games, which I know you all have discussed here, to talk about how we can create revenue. We are not ignoring the state's need to be fiscally responsible, but we have sent over proposal after proposal, and the Senate has not responded with any proposal on how to raise revenue.
In your mind, why not? Because it seems like they are hung up on the skill games thing, and that we could spend the rest of the hour just talking about that, and I don't want to, but like, why do you think you believe there's this reluctance to generate new revenue so that what you want to do with the sales tax doesn't create this bigger hole in the budget?
So I don't think it's a reluctance to create revenue. It appears very apparent there's a reluctance to do their job.
Expand on that.
When we get elected, we have responsibilities. You all are here, you're hired, you're supposed to create content, produce engagement for citizens, let them know what's on the news, and give them a space to talk. We are lawmakers. It's our job to create laws, but a part of that job includes passing a state budget. Folks, it's August 20th. The deadline was June 30th. Where is the state budget?
Why would they not want to do their jobs, though? Why would they not want to do their jobs?
Well, let's look at what Republicans are doing across the nation in this moment. We have to start with the leader of the free world. Why is that leader telling people that they can't vote by mail? Why are they cutting health care? Why was there a big, beautiful bill? Why are there executive orders that take away rights? Why are they gerrymandering in Texas right now? Why have they locked a state legislator up, not allowing her to leave without police escort? There's a lot of things Republicans are doing in this hour that have no right answer because it's wrong.
Yeah, and so I want to come back to this issue because clearly there's a lot of bills that are connected to this budget that are not getting passed from the state Senate. But this bill that the House has proposed would reallocate some funding from the sales tax. One of the Republican arguments is that, look, if you reallocate, there are things that won't get funded because you took almost $300 million from the sales tax that would have gone to other things in the budget. What's your response to that? That there would be less money for education, there would be less money for other priorities in the budget. What's your response if you just focus on this one bill? And I understand all of it's connected.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, it's choose a path to create the revenue. Is that regulating the skill games? Because they currently make a lot of money in Pennsylvania and they don't pay any taxes. We have to find a way. We've sent over proposals. Was it going back to the cannabis industry, having marijuana being safe? Representative Rick Krajewski's bill passed. They voted it down immediately. There was no debate, no amendments, nothing. Was that raising the minimum wage? We have sent these ideas to them this term, and last term we sent similar ideas. And when we get back to the transit funding and why it's so bad right now, because the roof, the analogy I use, the roof's been on fire for a long time with transit. We've been trying to get this done for a while, but you're asking me why they don't want to work. I can't make that answer up. I can't fill in the blank. But what we see is folks quietly quitting because they're not at the table working with us in Harrisburg right now, coming toward a compromise when we have all of this at stake. All of our children going back to school, some this week, many next week. People are trying to get to work. I don't pass a corner on my corridor, Baltimore Avenue, 60th Street, where people aren't waiting for a SEPTA bus or trolley. Like, folks are using it. They need it. And it is something that's not just unique to my district, but our entire region is able to rely on it, whether they're going to a game or going down to experience arts, wherever they're headed. Some people are leaving the city to go to work. You go to 69th Street, you see people going out to Monaco. I mean, it's commutes in both directions. Like, we are at an important hour. And the good news is, it's not too late for them to decide to do their jobs. It's not too late for us to get a compromise today, to get back to session this week. We are ready, willing, able. We have been at the table. We stayed in session almost the entire month of July when the Senate Republicans went on vacation and didn't do anything with the budget.
But to be fair, you did reject one proposal, right? Which is moving this money from the PTTF.
For sure.
And putting it into, unleashing it for operating today needs. Why is that not palatable? Because Senator Farry said he believes, based on prior conversations with SEPTA, that this would not, in the near term, impact their capital and their infrastructure improvements. They could do this for a couple years until they figure out the skill games things. You must not think that is the case.
Well, it's not me. The good news is SEPTA's CEO on the same evening said this is not okay. This is not acceptable. This is not an answer to our problem, short term or long term. In fact, it creates a bigger hole because robbing Peter to pay Paul doesn't keep the lights on for long.
Now, what he inferred was that basically SEPTA was okay with it, and then
Somehow,
someone in the Democratic caucus said, you know what, we don't want you to accept this plan, so you need to say basically that it's bad for SEPTA. I mean, I don't know if you have any insight on that at all.
That's news to me because when we talked to SEPTA for all this time, going back to last session,
they
all
were
the way
consistent
up to now,
to you.
They
said
were
we can't do
consistent
this.
on not on what we can't do, because that was, again, not something that we worked together on and compromise.
Sure.
One of the things that we did was when we saw the Senate Republicans say we need more accountability, we need more measures, we changed our proposal and sent it back.
Yeah.
We are making efforts to compromise.
You
we
folded
are
that into
doing our jobs. We are working across the building, across the aisle. That has not happened yet on their end, and these meetings and talks continue to go on, and we're hopeful, knock on wood, that things change immediately.
Yeah.
But as of right now, in this hour, in this moment that we are talking, we have not seen the same energy. We have not seen the same effort or the willingness. And what will inevitably happen is people will feel the pain. And it's not okay for folks to get elected to not do a job.
Yeah, and I want to bring in a caller because we have people calling in, lots of emails. We have Andrew from West Philly on the line. Andrew, you are on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
I just wanted to comment about how we can make these legislators in Harrisburg, actually take care of the SEPTA problem that we have in Philadelphia and around public transit around the state. And in my opinion, I think we have to treat these cuts to SEPTA like they are. They're an act of class warfare by billionaires against the working class people of Philadelphia. We have these Fortune 500 monopolies in Philadelphia like Aramark and Comcast and these lead institutions like Penn that pay virtually nothing. And these are the biggest beneficiaries of the system. And it's working class people that are going to take the biggest hit from this. And I think when you look at the situation that we've had in the last several months where we have a number of public sector unions in the city of Philadelphia, they're facing attacks from DC 33 to TWU, which stands to lose thousands of members over these cuts, to the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers, which is facing school closures and attacks on their conditions. This is a general attack by the capitalist class and their politicians on both parties against the workers, against the unions, against the working class, and it's unacceptable. We have to fight fire with fire. We have to have a general strike in the city of Philadelphia that's going to force these billionaires to pay up. That's where the money needs to come from. The rich need to pay, period.
Thank you. That's Andrew from West Philly. Patrick on YouTube says Philly should withhold all consent from any funding whatsoever to rural Pennsylvania until SEPTA is funded. Harold on YouTube says we the working poor always get caught with the short end of the stick. That's just some of the sentiment people have. And one of the things Avi and I have been talking about with Senator Farry was this whole idea of this urban versus rural divide that we see in Harrisburg. We had, Senator Pittman sort of saying, this ire that has sort of been building up among some of the rural Republicans. And so what are some of the arguments that you guys are making to try to get folks on the other side of the aisle on board and come up with a solution, a permanent solution for mass transit funding, not just for Philadelphia, but for mass transit throughout the state?
So we want to talk about the fact that when we look at SEPTA's economic impact, it goes far beyond the 5-county region. Every single time that they come up to Harrisburg, they've got some pretty good statistics on how they get trolley parts out of Jefferson County, rural Pennsylvania, for those who haven't been there lately, represented by, of course, a rural Republican. So there are economic impacts in districts beyond our area when they are choosing, who to do engineering and design. They are choosing people from within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I know our friends at the Pittsburgh Regional Transit Agency are doing the same thing. We're not just taking dollars and putting them around, but it's almost like planting seeds in a garden, seeing it bloom and blossom. We see it happening all over, beyond our 5-county region, beyond the city of Pittsburgh, and beyond Allegheny County, going into where the leader in the Senate lives in Indiana, and so on and so forth. People are relying not only on these services, but their businesses and many parts of rural Pennsylvania that benefit economically. But what we haven't seen is just a willingness to compromise, to get there. And like you said, Sherry, to have a permanent solution, not something short term, not something to give us a 30-day. We don't need a raft. We need to get out of the water. Like, we literally need to get out of the water and bring some sustainability to this issue.
You said something so interesting in the beginning of our conversation. You contrasted this moment with when you came to the State House, back when we were really feeling the effects of the recession. The state budget was not in a great place, and you were looking for, you said, I think, coins under the couch cushion.
That's right.
That's typically when the fighting really starts, when there's a scarcity. We're now in this moment where, yes, there's a structural imbalance, but you could, lean into the savings to solve it today. And you don't usually see fighting in those types of moments. So why are we fighting right now?
We're fighting right now because our friends in the Senate are politicizing this issue. They are making this issue a political issue when it should just be about us doing our jobs. There's politics. It's inevitable, right? We have these jobs because people decide who they want to vote for, which party, which candidate, in the primary, in the general. We're looking at a 2026 midterm where so many people are going to be deciding what they want to do, how they want to choose to voice their opinions, who they want to elect for which office, from United States House of Representatives, all the way down to the state house, right? So when we think about the fact that 2026 in Pennsylvania especially will be a very big year where there's a gubernatorial election and so on and so forth, where Pennsylvania could decide who will be in the majority in the United States House of Representatives. Yeah. Will there be a Speaker Jeffries or still a Speaker Johnson? We make these decisions with Pennsylvania. We are the ultimate swing state that goes back and forth. When people are feeling the pain, folks in Democratic cities seem to be getting targeted. It's not by coincidence.
Yeah. Has something changed about the politics, though, real quick, since you got there? That, would, in a sense, if we had the same Republicans and Democrats
we don't have them anymore.
No, I'm saying, but would we be having this fight because
no, we would not,
because something has changed?
A lot has changed. 2016 brought us a thunderstorm of a president who doesn't do politics as usual and who seems to go off the cuff, but of course is very strategic in his efforts of radicalizing a group of people all throughout our nation, especially right here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
I want to read this comment from Thomas, who says, what's happening with SEPTA has been years in the making. It's when partisan politics became okay. It's when personal attacks and smear campaigns became accepted. It's when Dems and Republicans stopped crossing the aisle and talking to each other, having drinks, getting to know families and who they work with. Some Dems are publicly trashing Republicans and doing TikToks titled "Think a Republican," and that's not how you handle a conflict. How do you handle this conflict? Because it's your constituents, House Speaker McClinton, that are going to suffer. And so how do you sort of get to the finish line, get a W here so that SEPTA won't crash and burn and people will be able to get to work and kids will be able to get to school?
Well, the first thing is understanding what your state representative where you live has done, how that person has voted, and what your senator has done, and who's in the majority. I talked to my good friend this morning, Senator Vincent Hughes. There are 23 Democrats ready to vote for our plan or any similar plan that creates real revenue for transit across Pennsylvania. So the idea that we need to win over 27 Republicans when so many of them are rural, that shouldn't even be the factor. The factor should be we have members, colleagues who represent these communities who want to support it, so we can work with them. Even if there are, dozen rural Republicans who say we're not for that, then vote against it. But give there a real opportunity for those who represent these areas to be in a bipartisan fashion. Because every one of our transit bills, all 5 of them that we've sent over, including the one with Senator Joe Boccozzi, Republican in Northeast Philly's proposals on how to bring more accountability to our local agency, they're bipartisan. We're not doing things on 102 versus no. We get Republican votes because there are Republicans that represent these communities that are impacted. We need to see our friends in the Senate step up and do the same type of work where we're saying, hey, this doesn't have to get 27 Republican votes because there's 23 Democrats that want to support this. They want to get on board. So I'm going to take the shot as a leader because that's what leadership requires in this hour. We think about profiles and courage. Who currently in the Senate Republican caucus is going to be in the next profiles and courage? Who's standing up in solidarity, letting their leadership know this is unacceptable. Inaction is unacceptable. 50,000 kids not being able to get to school is not all right.
Well, that is the final word from House Speaker Joanna McClinton, representing parts of Philadelphia and Delaware County, and always a pleasure to have you on the show, Speaker McClinton.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you to everybody who called in, emailed in.
And apologies to Mary, by the way, from
I
Center
know,
City.
Mary.
I really wanted to get you on,
to get
Mary.
you on, Mary.
I'm so sorry.
Please call in and again on another show. And thank you so much to our producers, Debbie Builder, Paige Murray Bessler, and Andreas Copes. Mike Schiffler is our visual producer. Al Banks and Tina Calicay engineered today's show. Our executive producer is Kevin McCrory from Studio 2 here at WHYY in Philadelphia. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you tomorrow. And coming up tomorrow at noon, adequate sleep, a healthy diet, crossword puzzles, comedy classes, even AI companions. Ooh. What do these things have in common, Jerry?
Well, they're all good for the brain.
The brain.
Yes. Tomorrow we'll be talking about the latest research to help you keep your brain sharp and healthy at any age. You can join us right here at noon. Coming up next on WHYY, we have Here and Now. Stick with us. Lots to come.